If you look up the word horrifying in the dictionary, just about every scene in Made in Abyss shows up. This is a show that can be very morally questionable at times with some really hard scenes to watch. I mean some really hard scenes to watch. I don't think you get it. I mean some really hard scenes to watch. This is a show that made people physically ill, a show that people called torture for kids, and a show that makes you wonder what the is on this guy's hard drive. But despite all the really horrifying moments, despite all of the really gross scenes, and despite all the very controversial manga panels, by the end of it all, this became a show that I don't want to stop watching. And I'm not the only one either. Why? Well, it's because Made in Abyss is a story about the journey of life. And much like life itself, the Abyss is unforgiving, cruel, and it imposes onto us a variety of negative traits. It teaches us to be selfish and greedy. It molds and warps time itself, perspectives, personalities, and most importantly, people. And one person worth mentioning in particular is Bondrewd. Bondrewd is introduced to the story to us through Ozen. While she's warning Riko and Reg about the dangers that await them the further they go, out of all the dangers and out of all the white whistles, she singles out Bondrewd in particular. In the anime, she specifically calls him a scoundrel. A scoundrel is defined as a dishonest or unscrupulous person. So right off the bat, the very first thing we learn about this character is that he is someone that you cannot trust under any circumstances. Then the next time we learn about Bondrewd is through Nanachi's backstory. He's not making use of these kids as humans. So by this point, it's very clear that Bondrewd is a horrible, vile, disgusting human being. But somehow, it's still surprising to find him experimenting on Reg. And it still feels like taking a punch to the gut when you realize that he somehow found a way to go even lower than this. To take the time to raise and care for a child who fell victim to the curse of the Abyss. Someone who suffered severe physical and psychological trauma, so much so that she lost all sense of self. To nurture and raise that child back to full health and care for her enough to make her feel like you are the best dad in the world and you're always thinking of her, only to turn around and sacrifice her without hesitation, is an incomprehensible level of evil that I don't think I've ever seen in a show in my life. But for some reason, it feels like with every new thing we learn about this character and every new action he takes, it strangely only gets harder and harder to get a lock on what he wants or who or what he actually is at that point in the story. And the fact that he's able to transfer his consciousness through his helmet is a literal representation of this too. A term that's frequently used throughout the story is naruhate. More often than not, it's used as a synonym for hollow, but the way that I like to think about it is that it's more so a term to describe someone who has become empty, soulless, or otherwise has lost what makes them human. In the manga, there's a side chapter that explains a little bit more about Bondrewd's zooholic artifact. There's a quote from Nanachi on this page that says, "Bondrewd's consciousness seems to have been altered to something that is no longer human as a result of repeated duplication." When Habo is describing Bondrewd in the manga, he says, "I've seen some astonishing native wildlife. I've also met delvers who have touched insanity. But when I met him, Bondrewd gave a different impression than all of them. There's something strange about his character. He feels like he's something that's just merely masquerading, imitating humans. If monsters truly do exist within the Abyss, things like him would qualify as one. Bondrewd's time within the Abyss molded and shaped him into something that is exactly that. This is the reason why it's so hard for so many characters to understand his thoughts and actions. While it's easy to write Bondrewd off as someone or something that's purely evil, that would be doing a disservice to what his character actually is. This is not someone who wants to see the world burn. This is not someone who does things with ulterior motives behind them. So when Pirushka says that he's the best dad in the world and he's always thinking of her, he absolutely is. In her mind, as well as in his own. When he says that he loves her, he absolutely means that. And when he recites the names and dreams of each and every one of the children that he sacrificed, it's because he genuinely cared for every single one. He's not doing the things that he's doing because he likes watching the light extinguish from the eyes of the children he sacrifices. This is not someone who derives pleasure from inflicting pain. This is not someone who knows what he's doing is wrong and puts the promise of a reward over his own guilt. This is someone who lacks the capacity for guilt in the first place. Regardless of how horrible the actions he takes are, as long as it leads to the ultimate goal of conquering the abyss, they're just necessary steps in the process. And I think the most frustratingly interesting part about Bondrewd is the fact that he is someone who is also genuine in his words and his actions. And this is one of the main issues that Nanachi has with him as well. She tries to run away from him, but she can't. She tries to fight with him, but she can't. And she even tries to reason with him, but she can't. Nothing she does seems to work. And it's because this is someone who values knowledge above all else. He's willing to sacrifice anyone and anything, including himself, in the pursuit of it. Not out of malice, but out of a genuine curiosity and fascination with the abyss. When you compare Riko to Bondrewd, there's a couple of similarities to make note of. Firstly, both characters came back to life through the use of a relic within the abyss. Nanachi helped both characters navigate the abyss. Both have an extensive knowledge of the abyss and are fascinated by its mysteries, and both strapped Reg to a chair and experimented on him. Now, when you think about it, arguably what Riko did to Reg was far more traumatizing than what Bondrewd did to him. Reg never mentions losing his arm again after the time he describes his phantom pain, but he spends a couple of different episodes shuddering at the thought of all the weird shit that Riko did to him while he was unconscious. She electrocuted him. She tried to pierce his skin with a blade. She used fire to burn his hair. She tried to pierce his metal parts with a drill. She played with his nuts. She stuck a stick up his ass. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I think the evidence is quite clear. We need to get this booty bandit off the streets.
Get out there! Get out there! Hang that now! I got the rope right here!
We know, or at the very least, we like to believe that there's no ill intent behind Riko's actions. But the same argument could be said about Bondrewd. There's no ill intent behind his actions either. Both are fueled by a complete adoration and fascination of the wonders of the abyss. But what makes Riko's obsession with the abyss any different than Bondrewd's? Why do we view Riko's actions in a different light, huh? Riddle me that, Batman. Well, I'll tell you. It's because of innocence. Innocence is a high-value commodity within the abyss, but not because it's something that can be taken advantage of, but because of its purity, its simplicity, its wholesomeness, its honesty. It's these wonderfully naive traits that draw us to children. It's these traits that make children so much fun to be around, and it's these same traits that make them so special.
Look at all those chickens!
Human children are the most valuable in the village of Iraburu. Children have a higher chance of having their wish granted by the cradles of desire because their minds contain less complex or messy thoughts and fears. Riko is an embodiment of that innocence that we all value. And it's the same reason why it's so much fun to watch her on screen. At the very beginning of the show, Riko is introduced as someone who wants nothing more than to reach the bottom of the abyss so that she can find her mother. Growing up, she diligently studied to become a delver like her mother was in order to learn as much as she possibly could about its complexities and its mysteries. And the abyss excites her to no end. She knows everything there is to know about it. probably more so than most of the adults we see in the show. But challenging the abyss is no easy task. There are way too many reasons to list for why it won't work for her. She's a kid trying to accomplish something that literally only a handful of adults have accomplished, and even fewer are able to come back to the surface and tell the tale of. Just going past the second layer is treated as suicide for red whistles like her, and she doesn't even have the physical ability required to even make it past the first few meters within the first layer. Not to mention the fact that she doesn't even have the ability to protect herself from the countless dangers lurking around every corner, and so on and so forth. But to Riko, none of that matters, as long as it means that there's a possibility that she can see her mother. If Riko represents innocence, then the abyss serves and functions as the opposite. Much like life itself, the abyss looks for every opportunity it can to steal away that innocence. It means learning that everyone in Ed, Edd, and Eddy were dead all along, or that Santa Claus isn't real, or that the white whistles you spent so long idolizing aren't actually the people you thought they'd be. Interestingly enough, initially, this theme of the abyss attempting to steal away these characters' innocence isn't actually shown through Riko. It's shown through Reg. Reg is introduced to the story as someone who has lost all of his memories. Reg is a child, or at the very least, acts in a similar manner to how a child would. Reg himself is going through different experiences to learn about himself in a similar way to how a child would. Initially, Reg wanted to believe that reaching the bottom of the abyss would mean that all of his questions would be answered. What's the true nature of the relics of the abyss? What's the cause of the curse of the abyss? Who created him and why? And why did he decide to come back to the surface? If he just reached the bottom, all his worries would go away. But then he and Riko get ambushed by a colony of corpse sweepers, and Riko gets snatched. Unsure of what to do, Reg recalls his memory of using the incinerator in an attempt to save Riko from the creature and fires, obliterating the entire colony of corpse sweepers and saving Riko in the process, but also almost killing her in the chaos. For Reg, losing his innocence means learning more about who he is. He has the power to quite literally rewrite the laws of the abyss, and that could either be a really good thing or a really bad thing. The idea that he could be one of the most dangerous creatures or the most dangerous creature waiting at the bottom terrifies him. And the closer he gets to finding out the truth about himself, the more he's forced to acknowledge this fact. Unfortunately though, the most prominent examples of losing that innocence comes through hardship. Nanachi was someone who had a very large portion of their innocence stolen away from them early on in their life. This is someone who lost their family and home at a very young age. Originally, Nanachi wanted to reach the bottom of the abyss as a way to escape poverty, because before this, Nanachi would go to garbage dumps and pick out the least disgusting things to eat. Nanachi had that same extensive knowledge of the abyss that Riko had, and probably even more so now, having spent more time actually experiencing it firsthand. Nanachi used to carry around a book filled with netherglyphs and figured out how to read it. So by this point, Nanachi believed in two things: Midi and the abyss. But both of those things get stolen away from Nanachi. Nanachi was forced to watch Midi turn into a hollow, forced to watch her screams of pain and agony, forced to watch her praying to be put out of her misery. Nanachi was so terrified of Bondrewd that they gave into their fear and helped him make his cartridges, made from children very similar to Nanachi, who had that exact same wonder, that exact same adoration in their eyes, that exact same innocence that they once had. The same cartridges that resulted from the experiments they and Midi were forced to suffer through. Nanachi was forced to realize that the abyss wasn't the place that they thought it would be. It turned Nanachi into a hollow and trapped the soul of the one and only person in their life they cared about into an immortal body of suffering. For Riko, though, I think it's a little different. Riko goes through a series of different experiences that ever so slowly chip away at her spirit. The first is when they reach the Seeker camp in the second layer. Riko is forced to realize, and this applies to Reg as well, that neither of them are really ready to continue descending further. When met with an obstacle greater than themselves, Riko can't do anything other than cry, and Reg is unreliable when it comes to making the correct decisions under pressure. Then it happens again when Riko gets poisoned. This is the only time in the show where it seems like Riko is about to give up. Here, I think she's forced to realize that even after all the preparations they've made so far in the story, there's still going to be things that they aren't able to account for, and that her and Reg probably wouldn't be able to do this alone, which is why it was so important that they had Nanachi join the group, because Nanachi was someone that had firsthand experience with many of the dangers of the abyss. And the last moment comes from a combination of her learning more about what happened to Nanachi, learning more about Bondrewd and his experiments, witnessing Reg get experimented on, and finally losing Perushka. I mentioned before that these characters' journey into the abyss mirrors the journey of life. This is a story about tragedy, about pain, about despair. We've seen each of these characters go through a variety of different experiences that would break even the most seasoned adults in the series. But on the other side of those hardships always lies hope. Episode 12 of the first season ends with the cliffhanger of Nanachi asking Reg to kill Midi for her. And the final episode begins with us finally learning about Nanachi's backstory, giving context to why she would ask for something like this in the first place. We learn that Midi's soul is essentially trapped within the body of a hollow, that Nanachi had been searching for a way to put her out of her misery without hurting her, but nothing she tried worked. She's functionally immortal and has lost all of her humanity, but is still able to feel pain. She never eats and still doesn't die. If she gets stabbed, it still hurts her, and she even sheds tears. She's not capable of screaming out, and yet her soul still remains imprisoned. One of Nanachi's biggest fears was that if they died before finding a way to help Midi, then Midi would spend all of eternity suffering like that alone. There's even the scene right before Reg decides to kill Midi for Nanachi, where it's heavily implied that after all of this was said and done, Nanachi was thinking about taking their own life. But on the other side of all of that pain lies hope. Meeting Reg and meeting Riko especially gave Nanachi hope. I mentioned before that Riko is an embodiment of that innocence we all value. She's also simultaneously a representation of the preservation of that very same innocence. I think my favorite scene that illustrates this point is this scene right here. Nanachi is telling Reg about how the only thing they and Midi ate while they were in the abyss were just tasteless food bars. And the reason why they want to learn how to cook delicious food is because they want to be able to share some with Midi if they ever got the chance to see one another again. Nanachi says that the fact that they weren't able to have delicious food together makes them feel bad. Then Nanachi says that they don't actually expect to ever see Midi again. And Riko chimes in, all confident and starry-eyed, and says, "It's too early to give up because this is the abyss after all." She believes that they will find a way to see Midi again, figure out why the curse exists, and come to understand the secrets of the hollows and the relics, because all of the answers lie at the bottom of the abyss. Only then does Nanachi start to realize that they're actually beginning to have fun. I think this one scene shows that the innocent wonder that Nanachi once had towards the abyss never actually left. It only got buried under the many layers of pain, regret, and trauma that they carry along with them. But Riko was easily able to bring that out. Then we finally see Pirushka's backstory and learn that in the end, she only wanted everyone to stop fighting so that they could all go on adventures together, which only dug that knife even further deeper into the wound. But on the other side of that tragedy lies hope. Pirushka turns into Riko's white whistle and the group is able to descend into the 6th layer. The 6th layer of the abyss represents the point of no return, which reinforces the fact that in life, we can only continue to move forward. We can't go back. No matter how hard life gets, we must persevere and find new ways to improve our lives and survive. The 2nd season of the show spends a lot of time in the past. Many of the characters that we see in this season are stuck in the past, and it prevents them from moving forward towards their future. Nanachi reunites with Midi, and all of the pain and guilt that they felt before, as well as all the happiness and comfort that they felt with Midi, come right back to the surface. Nanachi almost gives up the new adventure that they have with Riko and Reg so that they can stay with Midi forever. But this Midi is not the same one that Nanachi came to know and love. But on the surface, to Nanachi, none of that matters, because it means that they get to spend just a little bit more time with their friend. Reg is holding on to a past that he doesn't even remember so that he can try to help someone he's meeting again for the first time. One of Reg's biggest flaws is the fact that he's indecisive. He puts himself in situations where the consequences of his indecisiveness are far greater than what they would be had he just made a choice from the very beginning. Riko damn near dies because Reg spent so much time panicking and agonizing on how to help her, and had Nanachi not stepped in, she definitely would have. Because Reg can't decide between keeping his promise to Fapta or helping Riko save the village, he ends up putting everyone in danger, including Riko, Nanachi, and Fapta. Fapta inherits a past, an anger, a hatred, which defines her life in the present. Her goal, or rather, goal isn't actually the right word in this situation. It's more so a instinct. It's her very reason for existing. And until she fulfills it, she cannot move forward into a future of her own. Another thing to keep in mind is that the hollows within the village most likely didn't know the true nature of the village either. Wazukan didn't reveal to everyone that they were eating Iramui's children. Beloff knew because of Weko, and he hated himself for it. So when he sacrifices himself to give Fapta memories of the past, she's confused because now there's less justification for her rage when she begins to see and understand the perspectives of others. Had Fapta not learned about all of these new perspectives, she probably would have ultimately ended up destroying her own future. She could have and probably would have killed Riko in the process, destroying her relationship with Reg. She could have killed Vueko, destroying one of the only things that her mother cherished just as much as her. And she probably would have never learned about the side of her mother that she never got the chance to experience for herself. A big theme for Vueko as a character is her feeling of being helpless, or chained is probably a better description. She was abused and assaulted as a child. She felt like she couldn't do anything to help Iramui despite all of her best efforts. She is literally chained inside of Iramui's head, but also within her own mind as well, because she's chained down by her own past mistakes. She was never able to forgive herself for eating Iramui's children. She was never able to forgive herself for the fact that she wasn't able to perish along with Iramui, nor for not realizing the fact that Iramui wanted more than just that. No matter what mistakes we've made, we can't live in the past. Because like the Abyss, the real world doesn't wait for us to get back on our feet to recover. The real world presents us with a barrage of new puzzles to solve every single day. So if we get weighed down by our past regrets, we'll get swallowed up by the curse of the Abyss. And the fact that in the midst of reminiscing on her past, Riko forgets about the curse and turns into a hollow only reinforces this. You've probably heard the phrase, life is a journey, not a destination, or something similar to this. I think that this phrase applies very well to this story. Happiness and fulfillment don't come from reaching one final goal or achievement. Instead, meaning is found in the process, growing, learning, and experiencing life along the way. It's about living fully in the moment, appreciating where you are, and allowing yourself to evolve. Riko initially begins her story with a singular goal, or a destination is probably a more accurate way to put it. To reach the bottom of the abyss as fast as possible so that she can find her mother. But as she experiences more and more things, that destination turns into a journey. She originally thought that she wanted to become a white whistle so that she could go see her mother. But the further and further she got, she began to wonder if that was all there was to it. Even though she understands that there's a possibility that the person who wrote the letter could be someone other than her mother, it only makes her more and more excited because it just adds to the number of questions she wants to find the answer to when she reaches the bottom. Who really wrote the letter? Why does the curse of the abyss exist in the first place? Who made Reg and why? That original desire to meet her mother over time slowly became an excuse. But the one thing that doesn't change is the fact that she wants to keep having adventures with Reg and Nanachi forever. Despite all of the really fucked up stuff Riko, Reg, and Nanachi have gone through, Riko is a constant and consistent source of enthusiasm. She always finds a way to continue to keep moving forward. She truly believes that as long as they believe hard enough, they will reach the bottom and all of their questions will be answered, because that innocent wonder and adoration she has for the abyss never changes. And I want to see it happen. Made in Abyss is an incredible story about tragedy, pain, and despair. But it's also a story about longing, adventure, and hope. But I think the thing that surprised me the most about this show was just how similar it was to Hollow Knight.